Oh yeah, time for some more illogic. Last time we went over a week 1 match against Matt and his Cincinnati Incineroar. Please go check out that video first if you have not done so already, as we went over the Teambuilder and battle, in which, spoiler alert, the Bouffalant again started off strong. A 5-0 victory over Matt, started by Steelix breaking apart his team and cleaned up by Clawzer's 4 KOs. This time we're facing off against John and his Close Combat Club. Timestamps for the Teambuilder and battle will be in the description. John has been a thorn in the side of the Bouffalant for quite some time, the first coach to be as consistently until we got right. A tough matchup in our first monotype season in the league, followed by a rare week 1 loss in the VGC Season 3. Then we had one of my all-time favorite battles in the semifinals that season. I fondly remember my Incineroar Primal Groudon team and pivoting out against his threats. What an amazing matchup. We finally started getting the better of him after that, destroying him in the Season 4 regular season. He became our first victim of our sub-toxic Aegislash, as well as a nice Celebi Scrafty defensive core en route to a 6-0 stomp. Then again in the Season 6 regular season with Itemless Mew for Poltergeist Golurk, along with Dragapult absolutely cleaning house in a 5-0 victory. And then most importantly, the Season 6 semifinals, using an impressive Iron Defense Body Press Magnezone set that ripped through most of his team single-handedly, including the G-Max Snorlax, and taking a Haxorus Earthquake with ease. It was fun to cooperate with him in the Gym Leader Season too. In our previous season on the channel, John got the best of me in a Week 2 matchup, getting a key freeze into my Flareon with Jirachi's Ice Punch, tanking hits with an unexpected Swampert Ring, and then cleaning me up at the end with a Scarf Archeops. It was definitely disappointing, but John played pretty darn well in that match and deserved the W. Finally, Season 9 was a blast, multi-battling with him to great success and splitting the series against him before defeating him and Joey in the finals alongside Elf Owls, where we got a lucky para early on his Mimikyu and then abused the matchup with good rain play. A storied history, one in which John has had more success against me than most, especially in the early season. It's time to right that wrong against his team, which starts at the top with Alolan Persian, then Manectric, Xatu, first round pick Porygon Z, Garbodor, Jellicent, Machamp, Registeel, Alolan Exeggutor, Clefairy, and Wishiwashi. I advised John on a few picks here and there, but the team he made is surprisingly well-rounded for how one-dimensional it may seem. Lots of monotype picks, only 3 mons of a secondary type, but he ended up being able to cover a lot of ground with them overall. It's a little bit light on hazard play, only Xatu is a deterrent and remover with only 2 rockers, and then Garbodor for spikes and T-spikes, but the momentum play into the big boys is where the team shines. Easy pivoting from Persian, Manectric, Xatu, Clefairy, and Wishiwashi into the nukes known as Porygon Z and Machamp, along with the bulkiness of Jellicent and Registeel, who can beat teams on their own. It's a fearsome team. For me though, Garbodor doesn't make too much of an impact. It'll be physically bulky if it comes, but I have 0 poison weaknesses and easy ways to remove the hazards he would want to set up. Easy Tentacruel bait, easy Steelix bait, doesn't seem likely to come. Alolan Exeggutor actually has more power than I had first realized or anticipated, lots more coverage than I thought it would have, but ultimately is very slow and not as good as his other threats. Easy pickings for a couple of mons, including the abundant ice coverage all over my team, plus dual wing beat, U-turn, Sludge Bomb, and general tankiness from things like Steelix. I'm convinced on his top 5 to bring, but after that it's definitely a toss-up. I guess I'll go Clefairy to stay behind. I'm generally a more physically offensive team, aside from maybe Guzzler and Passimian, who can carry coverage moves pretty easily. It shouldn't be able to wall too much. Wish Teleport's annoying, but actually very manageable. I think Alolan Persian will be next for me. Yeah, it's a fast pivoter, but it doesn't accomplish that much else in the matchup. Even Mesprit can U-turn out pretty easily unless he's trying to counter Frostless for some reason. It isn't likely to do as much, aside from maybe remove items and Parting Shot out. Though that in and of itself is actually quite valuable, not to mention Fur Coat without a fire type to my name. Finally, Wishiwashi is a mon I'd heavily considered my own draft before deciding on Clawzer for my second water type, so I know how valuable it is at 20 points. That strong flip turn plus just enough coverage to be scary and super high stats when healthy make it a veritable threat, but I don't know if it'll do enough compared to everything else he could bring. I may have put it in his starting 6, but with no ground resistances or immunities plus a hazard game he's got to know is coming, I think Xatu is just more likely. It can fulfill the teleporting role of Clefairy pretty easily. It's also immune to Steelix's main offensive options and common coverage moves, and single-handedly warps my hazard plans. It would be a problem for it to come, even if I have a decent amount of options to handle it. The top 5 are really where we have problems, though, starting here with Jellicent. Strength Sap or Recover plus Will-O-Wisp makes this a premier physical wall in the format, and I have fewer options to deal with it considering I don't have a grass type. My best answers to Jellicent will have exactly 1 move to hit it with, and will not OHKO, meaning if he plays it right, Jellicent can probably sit in front of anything it wants to while whittling me down. Porygon Z was his first pick, for good reason. Base 135 special attack, boosted by download or adaptability, and very good for the format. 90 base speed makes this a menace. Not much is tanking those tri-attacks, let alone if it's modest, let alone if it's +1 or +2 from specs, download, adaptability, or nasty plot, or if it outspeeds everything with Scarf or Agility, or the coverage moves it gets. Tough to deal with for sure, we'll need to find a way forward against it. These top three, though, are my biggest concerns, and as we got close to the match, I became terrified of Registeel. Just a classic cursed rest talk set is incredibly difficult for me to break through, even with my physical attacks. They often do fail to a KO after a curse or two, and then these moves often leave me vulnerable to the retaliating boosted Iron Head or Body Press or something of that nature. Maybe something like Steelix could tank it for days, but what do I do in return? It's a tough balancing act. Next is Machamp. Oh boy, Guts Close Combat annihilates things. Or maybe No Guard Dynamic Punch will force everything into a dangerous state of confusion. Knockoff and Bullet Punch are amazing coverage moves for it against my team, hitting my fighting immunity and first round pick perfectly. It's a very spammable mon, and we didn't even get to see what he ran on at week 1, and I don't have a switch into it. Too many mons are too slow to it too, and thus just not viable at all in the matchup. Finally, Manectric is a problem. It netted 4 KOs for John week 1, and with electric and fire coverage plus that high speed stat, it isn't tough to see why. Overheat the Steelix and Rotom, T-Bolt the Aerodactyl and Tentacruel, Volt Switch around on almost everything else, plus the ability to switcheroo a Scarf or Specs onto something like Marowak. Yeah, Manectric does as it pleases this game, and while it got a nice mini sweep off last week, its main purpose this week, I believe, will be to Volt Switch out of, say, a Guzzlord switch into a free Machamp, or Volt Switch out of most anything else and drop in the PZ. It's a great, fast facilitator for his team and his electric immunity with surprising versatility. Making my team this week was very tough. I went back and forth on so many different options. Clang was not really something I considered, though, with Machamp blasting it, Manectric doing as it pleased, Jellicent walking over me unless I ran Toxic, and getting taken advantage of for setup options with something like Registeel. Marowak made me think for a bit with limited ground move switch-ins, but the low speed does Marowak, and again, I'm sure I won't regret that line later. Jellicent and Machamp in particular worry me, not to mention Porygon Z just needing a little chip, and even Manectric can ruin me with Switcheroo or Overheat. Rotom Frost was once again originally on the team, but couldn't quite find its way on. Considering the game plan I've got, I just cannot make it fit. Being outsped by PZ and Manectric does not help, not to mention being unable to break through Registeel easily, even with the neat nasty plot I was considering, and unfavorable trades with Guts Machamp are not where I want to be, even if it means missing out on some crucial pivoting. It will not be the same as week 1, this team, however, as I begrudgingly will be leaving Steelix behind. Yeah, I'm worried about his electric type, so I'm going to leave both ground types and then Rotom behind, but Steelix just doesn't do much of anything. It's a nice PZ check, but still takes a sizable chunk from it. Gets blasted by Overheat Manectric, burned by Jellicent, annihilated by Machamp, and walled by Registeel after a single curse. If those are the mons I'm most afraid of, I don't think I can afford to bring Steelix, even if it makes me that much less of a sturdy of a team overall. Man, I really wish I could bring 7 mons this week, but I cannot. And thus, I will be leaving behind Guzzlord. Yes, that is my final electric resist that I am leaving behind against a Manectric that claimed 4 KOs a week 1, and I just declared as the biggest threat to my team. But hear me out. Okay, I'm not 100% sure this is the right decision, but Guzzlord gets taken advantage of a little too much as well, especially by Machamp and a little bit of things like Will-O-Wisp Jellicent, Porygon Z, and Registeel, and without being immune to Volt Switch, Manectric will just click it every single time if this is the only resist I have, and get the switch out anyways. If I don't bring the ground type, not much good comes from bringing the Dragon, so as much as I wanted to bring this tanky boy, I just couldn't quite justify it this time. So we've got a bit of a theme to the team here this time. That revolves around how scared I am of those top 3 mons of Machamp, Manectric, and Registeel. For Registeel, I need to hit hard, so lots of plus attack natures. Manectric and Porygon Z are as fast special threats, so I've got investment and AVs to tank hits from them. Finally, Machamp and Registeel I can outspeed aside from Bullet Punch, so I've got 6 members that can outspeed the physical attackers. Only 1 new mon this time, but it is a key part of the strategy. This is a dedicated lead Frostlass, which means I am still afraid of Machamp, but my concern is first and foremost getting those spikes out onto the field against limited hazard removal and only 2 immunities in Xatu and Clefairy. Add in Poltergeist, which can OHKO offensive Xatu, Taunt to neuter a potential Registeel lead, and Destiny Bond to get the double KO against anything that isn't Bullet Punch Machamp, and you've got yourself a lead. The goal is definitely to get 2 layers of spikes out or a single layer plus a Destiny Bond KO, and even if Xatu is out, I'd probably take the trade of just getting some good damage onto Xatu to let in the rest of my team. Maybe most importantly, I anticipate a Manectric lead, in which case with my speed investment I can immediately tell if it is Scarf, which I think may be a likely bring for Aerodactyl, and my good mons in the matchup being not my electric immunities. This is why Machamp lead would be such a problem. Free knockoff and a Bullet Punch to limit me to 1 layer is not great, especially if you can just sit there and get the burn off with the Flame Orb as an example. Also, one more small little detail, we do have that extra 4 points in special defense, that is to make sure that if Porygon Z is downloaded, it gets the attack boost, not special attack, which is kind of neat, and we're only going to have, as you will see, only 1 mon that will give it the special attack boost. So, with the lead out of the way, we're going to go into the facilitator role this time, which is going to be Mesprit, with Light Clay and Screen to help me tank hits that are otherwise impossible to tank. The way I see it, Mesprit should ideally be able to get, say, a light screen off twice for the squad to help it survive those hits from Manectric in particular, which should allow them to just click buttons pretty easily, and potentially that reflect 2 for the troublesome Machamp when needed, which I am also packing Psychic for in particular to 2 a KO, even if it's pretty bulky while outspeeding max speed Machamp with just a little bit of speed investment here. Finally, U-turn gets me out, especially after taking a special hit with that, again, increased special bulk investment, and go right into something that can punch holes in his team. Again, ideally I get to put up the screens twice in the matchup, but who knows how things will actually go. The final facilitating piece is that Tentacruel with Liquid Ooze, again for the possibility of Jellicent being able to KO itself, but otherwise stopping Jellicent pretty well. It's possible that Tenta's role will just be to tank a couple hits, remove a couple items, maybe Toxic something, and then go down, but that should be plenty for it. Rapid Spin for those troublesome rocks, or Bounce Back Spikes. Scald is solid damage. Knockoff might just be for removing Cold Burst, but that's pretty good too, honestly. And a Toxic to hit that Jellicent and many other targets, with at least a little bit of a timer, compounding with Spikes to let the rest of the team put in the work. Next up are going to be the 2 Breakers, Passimian and Clawitzer. Each of these 2 are going to be packing the same item, Assault Vest. Yes, we've got 2 Assault Vest users, so they can soak up those Manectric hits way better than expected, and then fire back with some nasty, strong breaking moves from Adamant and Modest Natures. From Passimian, we'll start with, just like Mesprit has speed for Machamp, but this time just with the Adamant Nature, Machamp is all we need to outspeed right now. We are also running an Adamant Nature ourselves, and a full moveset of offense, as the intent is very clearly different. Close combat is obviously very spammable to hit everything but Jellicent and Clefairy, as well as the Xatu, but we've got a knockoff for all of those, as well as Gunk Shot to destroy Clefairy, as I wanted to at least have some move that's super effective to potentially stop the Wish Passing shenanigans in its tracks if it does come. U-turn rounds out the set perfectly, of course, and I see this as a nice middle ground against, say, the Manectric. If I just want to tank a hit and get out, with screens backing it up, Passimian has surprising bulk. EVs are a little bit maximized for bulk. With Assault Vest, it's kind of interesting, because we have to really consider the base stats that you've got. If you've got a little less special defense and a little more HP, maybe you want to get that special defense that's going to go up a stage a little bit more, and we'll kind of see the opposite there with Clawitzer, though I'm not going to get too terribly into that. However, I should be able to survive a pair of Specs Thunderbolts from Manectric, as well as an Adamant Close Combat from Machamp if it isn't Guts boosted, which is honestly pretty great considering the amount of things Passimian does OHKO in return with Close Combat with an Adamant Nature, especially if we've been chipping things down with Spikes or if we get a read correct with Knockoff first. This is an awesome breaker. This is probably the one I'll go into first, because it will pair it with the special partner of Clawitzer, who has an AV for the 2nd week in a row. I wasn't originally planning on Clawitzer, but I saw how strong it was, especially against something like a Registeel that cannot curse up its special defense stat, and thought it would be just a nice fit. Depending on nature and team, we may even be able to avoid the 2-hit KO from Manectric without a light screen, so the natural bulk of Clawitzer is kind of surprising too. The speed is a bit weird. We've got enough speed for Machamp. Speed creeping us, tried to speed creep Jellicent. That is, if he thinks we're going to go for just a couple of points to outspeed Jellicent, who is 1 base point faster, and then Machamp invests enough to beat that, we have enough to beat that. It may or may not come up, it's fine. What's important is that Dark Pulse and Arsphere are an incredible duo of moves backed up by Stab, Water Pulse, and Aqua Jet that can shred through most anything he can throw at us. Finally, rather than raw power, we have our final little setup sweeper with D-Dance Aerodactyl without rock coverage in favor of the flying, ground, and dark to hit basically everything I care about hitting, and carrying that Whack and Berry for the anticipated Thunderbolt. I thought about Lumberry a little bit too, but figured this was potentially more likely a hit for me to need to tank up to set up to +1, so we're on Whack, and besides after Spikes damage, +1 Crunch into +1 Burned Crunch will still KO fully defensive Jellicent, which I sort of anticipate to come as his physically defensive check to Aerodactyl. Ideally, Machamp and its Bull Punch are gone, and the team is stripped enough such that +1/+1 arrow can sweep through the team, taking 1 hit from Manectric in the process of getting set up, and then outspeeding everything, including Scarf Manectric and some Agility Porygons. That's the squad. I admit I don't really feel all that confident, though. I'm not the biggest fan of Suicide Leaves, but Spikes just look too good against him overall, and bringing no Electric Resist seems really weird, but the game plan seems kind of solid to help back that up, considering what I think he'll be bringing against me, or maybe more so considering what I would bring against me. So I guess we're going in and we're going to see what happens. Almost perfect. No PZ, and instead is Alolan Persian. That's a bigger problem than I had originally anticipated, actually. No PZ lessens the value of those AVs a decent bit. And A-Persian has problematic moves like Knockoff from items, Parting Shot for Momentum, and lower stats. And even things like Play Rough for Passimian and Foul Play to absolutely shred Aerodactyl. Actually, Fur Coat makes it a pretty good tank for Arrow too, doesn't it? And I didn't EV Arrow to outspeed it neutrally because I wanted an Adamant Nature and a little more tankiness. Well, This may be a bigger problem than I thought, but hopefully between the breakers we'll be able to handle it. But pre-game, we were already off to a bad mindset. Mindset-wise here. This was definitely a dedicated lead for Frostlass, but I waffled quite a bit, doubting myself. What if A-Persian's the lead? What do I do there when I'm outsped? What if it's Xatu? What if it's Machamp? I did end up picking correctly, but it isn't a good sign. Good luck to John as we begin into, indeed, the Manectric. Well, we can find out pretty quickly if it's Scarf. But then I waffled again. Spikes are cool, yeah. Having spikes on my side is not. Of course, it matters a whole lot more that they're in his side rather than mine. I'm not really sure why exactly I clicked Poltergeist turn 1 instead of Spikes, but I guess it was to confirm the item? I didn't need to do that. I have Calcs, and if he outspeeds, as he will actually here, as we see the critical hit Volt Switch, I confirm he's a Timid Scarf already. And the switch-in is going to be the Registeel, who takes pitiful damage and heals back up with the leftovers. I really didn't need extra information to know that he was going to have. Imagine if that were a Persian switch-in. The only way that play worked is if he went Xatu, but when I have 2 stabs super effective against it, why? Especially with how much time I took on the lead. It may have convinced John I wasn't a dedicated lead with spikes, making it less likely it would need to come in to bounce them back. And now here I am in front of one of the biggest threats. This thing can set up rocks early game, or can curse, or, most importantly, can just Iron Head me into the Stone Age with my Sash down. And I haven't gotten any spikes up yet. Why? Anyways, I think it's probably just more important to stop any setup possibilities right here, as I do get the successful taunt off to stop the rocks setup. So we'll just say that turn 1 I taunted to stop the rocks, shall I? That would make me feel a little better at least. Well, we've got 2 possibilities now. Destiny Bond is tempting to take down the 7/8 health Registeel for nothing if it has Iron Head, but spikes are also permanent, aside from a potentially very annoying Xatu, and could hit things in the meantime while I take advantage of off turns from Xatu. It's also possible, I think this thing doesn't have an offensive move to hit me. It's possible that it is just mono body press, though that wouldn't make that much sense. I have several resists to it, many of which I brought. I wonder. In the end, though, I did choose to just set up the layer of spikes as I went down to the Registeel. Definitely not my ideal trade, though we get a little bit of a cursed body there. And this is at least one that could have gone better. I'll learn how to play Frostlass correctly one day, but it isn't today, apparently, I think. For now, though, we do need to threaten the Registeel out, so it's going to have to be Passimian that comes in early, considering the only other options we really have to set up screens, or possibly 3-hit KO with Clawitzer. CC actually doesn't KO from this range, because Registeel is just a monster, and I don't think John will want to allow Registeel to go down this early and easily. Plus, it's very possible he doesn't have another attacking move that he can click thanks to the Cursed Body activation on Iron Head. So I think it's a good idea to just stay in and click Knockoff. Well, he stayed in. No more leftovers at least, and Body Press does an okay amount. From that damage, I think John and I both know I'm in range to KO him with close combat. So it's about time we get out of here with U-turn as he stays in. Again, on the turn that the taunt wore off, really? I mean, I guess Registeel isn't that useful. It's possible that the taunt, into Tentacruel early to tank the Body Press with relative ease, I guess. The Jellyfish again coming in because of the resistances, and Black Sledge the second week in a row. Well, I guess I just scald this thing now, right? Looking back, it would be very easy to say that it's about time for him to switch out now, which could definitely have led to me going into, say, Mesprit or something for a round of screens, or maybe into Passimian, but instead I'm going to stay again just in case he wants to set up his rock, so I have my spinner in at least, and he is going to swap into the Xatu, who's going to eat a very light Scald, because I didn't really think I had all that much of an option, as actually we do see that he does not have leftovers on it. It is max HP though, so I'm assuming that's either going to be a Colbur Berry on it, potentially max speed, or it could be a Rocky Helmet, and this could be very physically defensive. Those are the 2 most likely sets, I think. Defog sure would be annoying, but I also don't want to punish this necessarily with Passimian, due to him possibly outspeeding the turn after, and more importantly having Psychic as a coverage move that he would be firing off right now if he has it anyways. So the middle ground play for me is just going to be an interesting one that I didn't think I'd be using this early in the game in Clawitzer, which should force it out and may be able to do more depending on Trick Room. Oh no, not the Trick Room in the Trick House. He could potentially stall me out a bit with Roost, which would be annoying, but teleporting out is even worse. Of course, I also know I need to claim the KOs where I can get them, so I'm going to click Dark Pulse, removes the Colbur Berry, and unfortunately no flinch as he does teleport out into the Machamp, who takes spikes damage, and then, of course, reveals the Flame Orb for the dreaded Guts set. Okay. So I think we can all see what the problem is here. I did not bring my Steelix, nor did I bring my Guzzlord. I left Marowak behind, and I didn't even bring my Clang. So under Trick Room, what can revenge this thing? Heck, what even takes a single hit? Does this outspeed and Oko my entire team? It seriously might. It's time to pick a sack, and frankly, I may have to do so every time Machamp comes out under Trick Room. My whole game plan was based around outspeeding this so that this isn't a problem. So to see this happen, oh boy. Well, frankly, I think the least useful team member is going to be Tentacruel, who let the Xatu into Trick Room in the first place and even resist the close combat hit that we all know is incoming. And then with 2 turns left, we know this is either a knockoff or Fachati, so with Tentacruel taking that much from CC, we know it's adamant. Nothing else wants to take one of those, especially with Bullet Punch backing it up for Arrow. So Tentacruel's just going to have to go down here without accomplishing much of anything. Unfortunate, but we're going to have to make a play now, and that's going to start with a quick switch into Mesprit to bluff the Colbur Berry. If he thinks we may have Colbur, who may survive the knockoff in any way, then we can effectively bluff the follow-up Psychic, which, depending on investment, could take care of the Machamp that is currently getting chipped down by Spikes and Bird. Instead, however, I'm going to immediately double rate out on the final turn of Trick Room into Passimian, which is a decent bulky answer to just about everything he might send out as he goes straight into Registeel, which is now chipped to almost half. So that's Trick Room 1 down, and oh boy, do we see some problems from this. If Trick Room goes back up, Machamp is going to slay unless we get some screens up, and even then we're already on the back foot. At least we made a play just now, right? It's the least I could do, I guess. Well, we don't really have a choice but to CC this turn to prevent rocks. Wow, a taunt would have been pretty nice here, but Assault Vest could potentially come in handy, as Xatu is going to be the sack hero, and CC actually does do enough damage. Well, that's fine, I suppose, but imagine if the Dark Pulse earlier had KO'd, or even better, instead of messing around early game, and gotten a nice knockoff on the Xatu into the Dark Pulse and making this not a sack. As it is, we're at -1/-1, with John getting the free switch, and Manectric just makes a lot of sense. Or would if I didn't have the AV on, meaning I'm still not taking that much from its moves. Though, with that said, this, I think, is my biggest mistake turn. The way I see it, I've got 3 choices. I cannot switch, as anything else is still taking just a massive chunk from Volt Switch, so I may as well take the initiative being given to me to fire off a move. CC is the only move that guarantees the KO onto Manectric, considering that Gunk Shot can miss, and the other 2 do not do nearly as much damage, though the others do still very much tickle and get in range of Spikes, or Spikes plus Aqua Jet from the Clawitzer. CC is also by far the best punish for a switch into Registeel, Machamp, or Persian Alola, making Passimian a potentially very valuable asset later in the game, actually, when you think about it, considering that against those 3 outside of Trick Room, or in Trick Room against 1 or 2 of them, something I kind of failed to recognize at this time. The punish, of course, is a switch into Jellicent, which when coming in can either burn me with Willows or Scald, or can set up the ever-dreaded Trick Room number 2. The next option I have is Knock. That's the appropriate punish for that, of course, and still does do a significant amount of damage to Manectric that could stay in Thunderbolt, though that is unlikely. It is still definitely the safest option, though Machamp switching in could potentially threaten a Bullet Punch against my -1 defense, and even if Alolan Persian and Registeel resisted by merit of type and being itemless, the follow-up CC would make it about the same consequences as him switching in Jellicent into CC in the first place, with the added benefit of some more chip and switching in on Spikes. Finally, U-Turn is really solid momentum, especially because I'm pretty convinced right now he is definitely going to Volt Switch. U-Turn out of Machamp into Mesprit, Registeel into probably Clawitzer, out of Jellicent into probably Clawitzer, and out of Alolan Persian into probably Clawitzer as well. So, what is the right play? Frankly, looking at this a step back after the match, frankly, CC looks like the least optimal play. There's decent upside, but looking at the board state, it's highly unlikely he'll just sack something off to another fighting move, and even more so, I haven't shown him any reason to believe I can switch moves. I ran Scarf week 1, so how likely is it that I'm locked into CC? Well, quite likely. But if he Volt Switches, he'll see the damage, realize I'm AV, and know I can switch moves, right? And actually, now that I think about it, I think I did switch moves earlier, but we still haven't revealed the item yet to him, and we could potentially not have revealed enough information to him to predict his move based on what we have. That could affect what he goes into. So CC also lowers my Spadeffigan, which means I could potentially grab a KO and say Registeel, which isn't doing much anymore, and then at -2 fall to another Volt Switch anyways. I actually had Knockoff locked in for quite a bit. The safe move that could hit plenty on his team that not only actually hits Jellicent, but removes the Scarf from Manectric, which means I wouldn't have to set up a D-Dance with Arrow, but also keeps me in against everything else and threatens them out with CC. However, as I am wont to do, I overthought everything. Wanted to ensure the KO on the Manectric in front of me and clicked CC. Yeah, I'm really not sure either. I changed my move to CC, and looking at this in hindsight is not helping my confidence on the move. We'll get to see the full consequences of that play a little bit later, as Manectric is of course going to fold switch. We all knew that was coming. Chunk me, and his Trick Room setter is going to get in for free, but suffice to say this was not the correct play. Jellicent is in, nearly full health, and I am not prepared for Machamp. The two options here are U-turn out or knockoff, but without leftovers recovery to speak of, it's highly likely that this is another Colbur Berry on this Trick Room setter. I do need to pop that Colbur at some point, but is this the right time to do so? The downside to popping it now is that he gets up Trick Room as I'm in with Passimian and no screens against, well, looking at Machamp again and then look back at the team. If I had popped the Colbur turn prior, this play would have been a lot easier. I guess U-turn into Mesprit on the Trick Room isn't going to be the absolute worst play here, but I'm not happy about it. If Trick Room is up, I need to defend myself against it, so I need to get Reflect up. But I also kind of missed that Machamp would actually need to come in if it wanted to do damage in Trick Room. Xatu could easily get out into it because it has X to teleport, which guarantees that whatever is coming in next comes in safely. How exactly is Machamp supposed to come in safely against this Psychic type? It doesn't actually come in safely at all in anything except for a free switch provided by a team KO, so I do believe that this play, and actually several plays in a row here, were mistakes, and we'll talk about it more in depth in the retrospective at the end, but sitting in front of this Jellicent is unproductive, we'll say. I did decide to set up Reflect first because I wanted to be able to operate Machamp, not really understanding that Machamp wasn't exactly going to be coming in against a Psychic type that was in fact packing Psychic, and in return I eat a Shadow Ball for way too much and get the Spadef drop. I could probably survive another one to get the Light Screen up at a very low health, or U-turn out safely, but instead for some reason I decided to sack, the Passimian. Get rid of a couple more turns of Trick Room, meaning I ended up sacrificing a third of Mesprit and the rest of the life of my close combat Revenge Killer to Trick Room, and I got 0 damage off on that Jellicent. I didn't even pop the Colbur Berry. I was so close to figuring out what exactly I needed to be doing here, but not quite close enough, and again, we will go over this in depth later as to what I was thinking and why I just missed a little bit. Instead, after Passimian went down for pretty much no good reason, I'm going to be honest there, I'm going to bring out Clawitzer again for basically free Dark Pulse against something on the final turn of Trick Room. And with only a couple months left on my side, John decides to make the safe play by sacking off the Registeel to a pair of Dark Pulses, making this a 3-4 game after that, but with a Guts Machamp, Scarf Unresisted Manectric, Colbur Berry Jellicent, and full health, probably Fur Coat, Foul Play, Alolan Persian. That matchup for Aerodactyl isn't exactly looking stellar, is it? In my mind before the game, I wouldn't have both Manectric and Machamp alive at the end of the game for Aerodactyl, let alone Fur Coat, Alolan Persian too, let alone a Jellicent this healthy as well, because Aero can't exactly break through all of them. Well, this is a problem, isn't it? Don't know if I'm getting screens back up either, and sacking Passimian so easily without even breaking the Colbur or getting Chip on Jelly was definitely a big problem. What even is my endgame anymore? Well, I got hyper-fixated on ensuring Trick Room didn't go back up again, and misplayed a few more times here at the end. Manectric, as is always the case outside of Trick Room, is the free switch-in off the KO as he discovers yet another Assault Vest user on your boy. So what did I go for? You guessed it, the wrong move, as I'm going to Dark Pulse into the full health Alolan Persian. Aura Sphere really was the best play here, and I'll be going into what the real issue with the Jellicent was at the end again. But Alolan Persian really isn't as valuable as his other members right now, and is really the only possible switching against something that literally just clicked Dark Pulse a turn ago. So Alolan Persian comes in, takes the hit, and clicks, you guessed it, Knockoff to get rid of the AV, which means that I am indeed in Manectric range, even with the pitiful damage from Reflect. As I get a little lucky with the Dark Pulse crit because I clicked Dark Pulse again, because I didn't want Jellicent to come in. Well, Clawitzer doesn't do much of anything anymore, and Mesprit definitely doesn't either, especially against Persian, and Aero is stopped by all 4 of them. So what do? Why, sack off some more mons for no reason, of course. I'm really unsure as to what I was trying to accomplish here. Maybe I thought he would try and save the Persian for some reason, and I swapped in Mesprit as Reflect was ending. Then it just went down, and of course it would be outspeed in week 2. Oh, that's right. Even worse, I could have gotten a little bit more chip from the U-turn to make sure that it would go down a little bit easier, but instead I wanted to try and get Reflect up, and instead gave him more leftovers recovery for free. If the only way he gives me a free turn to Reflect is if he taunts. So U-turn into maybe Aerodactyl was the only play possible there, and instead Mesprit goes down, and then I'm going to get the Clawitzer to come in and get another Dark Pulse again before going down after another knockoff there. And Yeah, I'm not really sure what the end game goal here was, honestly. With me desperately trying to sure Jellicent doesn't come in without realizing I'm gonna have to KO this and the Jellicent anyways if I want to win. So multiple desperate maneuvers that didn't accomplish anything at all means that I'll just have to claim as many KOs as I can before going down. Aerodactyl is of course going to come in and get rid of the Persian before the... Well, there he has a couple different options for what to come in next, and he does decide on the Jelly. I think I'd hoped for some reason I could survive a T-Bolt into a Bullet Punch, and then he went Manectric first, but Jellicent may just secure the win here with Crunch not KOing and Trick Room going up that dreaded third time. Imagine I'd gotten that extra chip on Jellicent. I could have at least had a shot at KOing it with Crunch, right? And then maybe force the roll, but alas, as Jelly goes down, so too does Aerodactyl's. Machamp deservedly gets the final KO in a very sloppy 2-0 loss for the second season in a row on the channel to the Close Combat Club. GG to John and everyone who prepped with him. Great brings and great team for a game that I think we both overcomplicated quite a bit. There is plenty to talk about, though, as I've gone over this battle quite often with myself, so let's just get to it. So with this retrospective, I want to talk about a few things. Why John's game plan outdid mine, how I missed his game plan and what the biggest issue of the team was, and how I was very close with what I wanted to accomplish, but wasn't quite there. As I outlined at the beginning of the Teambuilder, I went into the process with the mindset of hitting hard immediately, which sure seems to have been correct, honestly. Slapping on AVs to tank hits from special attackers, we saw how little I was taking from Volt Switch, and it was actually really nice overall for next moves. As it was timid and Choice Scarf, it actually, you could say maybe it wasn't as important to need to tank those hits, but also because it was that weak, it meant I took even less damage from that, which was actually pretty nice. And then finally, I'd also outsped his physical attacks with everything, which it kind of worked to neutralize Registeel, outspeeding with the Clawitzer and the Passimian, but Machamp, well, that was the issue, wasn't it? I noted it as the second biggest threat in my team preview for a reason. My plan to bring it down was to simply out-trade it by merit of outspeeding it. Maybe I'd trade a Mon to bring it to well below half, and then maybe another Mon takes a hard Bullet Punch, but I do inevitably bring it down. I didn't anticipate the Trick Room to come out so effectively, even if I had noted in my own personal team building process that he had about 4 different Trick Roomers, 3 of which weren't even Psychic type, which is by far the most common type to see it on. I didn't even mention Trick Room in the first part of this video here, because I just kind of dismissed it. It's been a while, if I don't mind saying so, since Trick Room has beaten me. Frankly, I feel as though I do face a disproportionate amount of shenanigans, including screen setup and Trick Room, potentially because, as someone who is a perennial top contender, other teams feel they need to try and get something out wacky, or something out there to get the upper hand. These tricks actually rarely work, and it often takes either a lucky hit, a poor mindset for me, or most often, me just getting out-predicted, something Chad definitely excels at, and something Steve has definitely been learning as well in the league. All this to say, I don't often worry about screens or Trick Room unless they are coming from a dedicated source. Things like Grimmsnarl or Alola Ninetales that bring screens often, or a team with multiple obviously slow threats, including things like, say, Bronzong, which is a very common Trick Room setter, maybe in a low tier league could be Musharna, or the Conkeldurr that we often see in the Trick Room. With the overall low speed of the format, including on my team, from threats I thought he would anticipate me to bring, like Steelix, which underspeeds his whole team, that he wouldn't even consider it. Xatu isn't exactly a well-known Trick Room threat, though with Teleport it certainly did work, maybe the best out of all of them, as the Suicide Trick Roomer. And I didn't think he'd get as creative with the Jellicent as he did either, going generally offensive with the Trick Room to force me to bring it down into something else. Finally, he identified as well as I did how much of a threat Machamp was, but if you'll recall, my main concern with bringing the electric immunities and resists was how they in turn got murked by Machamp due to their slow speed, meaning I brought 6 Mons that outsped Machamp. Machamp isn't the classic Trick Room sweeper, especially, again, in a lower speed format like this, but John sure identified it as such, and that deserves, I think, a lot of kudos. I could definitely see his game plan having involved luring out those low speed threats like Guzzlord or Steelix with smart pivots into Machamp outside of Trick Room, or trading a full Mon for the necessary chip, or just being willing to out-trade with them under Trick Room, and frankly, it didn't even cross my mind. I'm not even calling Trick Room a cheap strategy, but I am saying that it's often a mistake bringing Trick Room against someone like me. In this case, what a great matchup call it ended up being, especially when I brought none of my slow threats. That will definitely force me to reevaluate some of my decision making in the future, especially with a significant amount of slower Mons on the team. I do love and tend to run bulky offensive teams, but having slow threats like this is still a little new to me. It may mean that I end up sacrificing some of the regular season to learn these Mons, but it will be worth it and make me better for it. All the better if it forces me to challenge some preconceived notions I had about some of these Mons. For example, a weak spot on this week's team stands out to me as one mon that really didn't do what everything else on the team did in the game plan. I really love Tentacruel, and it was a necessary sack considering what Champ was doing early game. But why exactly did I bring it in the first place? A Jellicent check? Are you kidding? How is that checking Jellicent? If he happens to bring Strength Sap, which he shouldn't because of Liquidoo's access to recover, and Will-O-Wisper Skull taking down physical attackers anyways? Really, it just added another electric weakness to a mon that didn't even beat Jellicent, and didn't take 2 hits from a champ either. So why was it there? Honestly, I could see something like a special or mixed Guzzlord being the better play there, maybe with a Chopper Berry to take close combat, while hitting back with, I don't know, a Draco Meteor, or running Special Bulk to actually tank Manectric hits unlike everything else on the team. Maybe a Choppal Steelix. I did consider something like Iron Defense so I could set up a little and slam things with Body Press, even if it did make me overall weaker to Jellicent, just so I could predict that with a Toxic, or just switch into something that wouldn't mind it like Klotzer or Mesprit. Most importantly, my view of the team evolved over time, adding in Screen's Mesprit, removing Rotom and Guzzlord from the earliest team iterations, adding Klotzer and the Assault Vests. But my view on Tentacruel never changed or evolved, and neither did the aspects of the team building that were similar to that. If I have the Screen's Mesprit on the team for defense, do I need the AVs too? Are there other mons who can try and actually fit on here now that I have the defensive support? If I'm using Screens, why would its easiest switch into Mesprit of Jellicent nearly require me to go into my only other non-offensive piece in Tentacruel that cannot take advantage of the Screens? Klotzer or Guzzlord would be the best responses, so when do I go into Tentacruel? The team evolved, but my mindset on other aspects remained rooted, and that was a big mistake. I'm sorry, this explanation is taking a little bit, but I think that should fully overall explain how I both out-prepped myself and got out-prepped. And then finally, in-game reasoning. The biggest issues I had was dealing with Trick Room going up again after the first time. We saw what happened when the Colbur wasn't popped with Tentacruel and Klotzer after they failed to KO the Xatu. Though that didn't make or break the game in any conceivable fashion, the Rampage Machamp went on after sure did, destroying Tentacruel as I was forced to pick a sack. I didn't have a way to pick just one sack if that happened again, and I rightfully played scared of Trick Room getting up again. Or if it did, it had better be under Reflect, which I did. The issue is not that I let Trick Room get up a second time, it is that I did not play around it going up a third time well enough in advance either. What Jellicent could do to Passimian was negligible. What would have mattered infinitely more would be to get rid of a Colbur Berry, which it sure did have, which would mean potentially trading Passimian to a burn compared to ensuring the next threat I had in against Jellicent, whether it was Crunch Aerodactyl, Dark Pulse Klotzer, or maybe even Psychic Mesprit if it got low enough. Literally my entire team could threaten the KO into Jellicent to prevent it from setting up Trick Room again after that. Essentially, while Machamp was alive, Machamp under Trick Room was identified correctly as the biggest threat. So Jellicent under Trick Room? Annoying, I guess, but not a threat, which is why I think Passimian not popping the Colbur early was the biggest misplay in the game. So I'm in front of Jellicent as Trick Room goes up. So? U-turn out the next turn. The slow U-turn, need I remind you. Ensure John never gets the chance to abuse Trick Room. Ensure that Jellicent goes down the next time it comes in. Instead, I tried too hard to make complicated reads that weren't possible instead of playing properly. So what I'm really saying is, John played his game straight as I tried to anticipate moves it wouldn't make sense for him to make. Close combating the Manectric when you know he's going to Volt Switch out, that needed to be a hard U-turn, maybe a knockoff. No way does Manectric stay in, and even if I don't KO, Spikes KOs it next time it comes in, or Klotzer picks up the KO with Aqua Jet, as opposed to letting Jellicent in for free to get the Trick Room off. Even then, after it did get that off, and here's the real mistake, don't let it switch out for free. Yes, if there's one takeaway, my big mistake was trying to catch the Jellicent switching in, rather than trying to catch the Jellicent switching out. I was close to catching this when I had Mesprit out during the second go-around with Trick Room, but squandered that opportunity by preparing for Jellicent switching out, when I should have been focused on what was in front of me. Particularly how Jellicent could not possibly have swapped out into the Machamp, and I needed to simply hit and set up for the Jelly in front of me. The in-between time after the second Trick Room better illustrates that point, perhaps. All those turns where I was Dark Pulsing the Persian, for example, really didn't make sense. I was trying to catch the Jellicent coming in, yes, but at that point it still had its Colbur Berry. That doesn't mean that I could KO it if I pop it on the switch. It means that John will save it so that it can survive that hit, and set up Trick Room on the same turn as a sack. He was giving me the Alolan Persian and I was not taking it. It may seem silly to play it to his hands there, right? But think about it. Jellicent is sent in on the free switch and I Dark Pulse into its Colbur Berry, even ignoring the possibility that I get the flinch. What then? 4 turns of Trick Room left. Trick Room is up and I sure didn't stop it. What is the worst case scenario? Machamp gets 4 turns to run Rampage over my team. What's the best way to stop that? Honestly, spamming Aura Sphere into Jellicent until either he switches or I go down. If I immediately follow up with the Dark Pulse, an obvious choice to KO the problem in front of me, it introduces the problem of Machamp sweeping the rest of my team under 3 turns of Trick Room, 1 for each remaining Mon. However, if I do not KO what is in front of me, I'm actually suddenly safe. Yeah, maybe Jellicent Shadow Balls me or Skulls me, but so what? 3 turns left, and then I Aura Sphere again. He KOs me. Then 2 turns left, and so what? Actually, that's quite beneficial as Mesprit gets to come out and set screens again, or maybe just one screen reflect before threatening to KO with Psychic or going down a Shadow Ball. There are a couple ways John could have played around this, I think. Sacking Manectric to Aura Sphere or Dark Pulse to bring in the Machamp, or having Recover on Jellicent, even if that would leave it wide open to Guzzlord and its moveset. But those would have been very risky plays that were very tough to find. So this was a way better endgame strategy for me that would have resulted in either a 1-0 loss, only 1 step behind John, or a 1-0 victory, a mere 1 step ahead of John. Instead, we fell to 2 steps behind after wasting turn after turn, Dark Pulsing in front of A-Persian before needlessly sacking Mesprit and Clawitzer, not to mention the silly sacking of Pessimian previously, all of which were honestly the most pathetic parts of the gameplay. There were better ways to combat Trick Room that I was so close to discovering, but was just 1 step away from doing so. In the end, well, I guess we didn't really go over the team and the Mons real quick. I guess what I'm most disappointed in is not that I didn't find a way to combat Trick Room, but I think just the poor sacking of those Mons, particularly looking at the Pessimian, the Mesprit, and the Clawitzer there in the middle and end of the game. It was not very great. So I do kind of want to go over the team a little bit. I'll go over this real quick because it's already been pretty long. Tentacruel was a great sack, though I wish it had a chance to do more. I didn't play Frostlass very well at the start, and that was another one of my biggest issues and regrets for sure. Kudos to Clawitzer picking up another KO alongside Pessimian, as those 2 sets worked out pretty well, though I just detailed how I could have done much better there. Mesprit kind of needed a Colbur Berry, and I tried clicking Reflect one more time when I couldn't afford to. And even though it seemed as though his whole team was stacked against Aerodactyl, it still claimed a pair of KOs at the end and was 2 steps away from pulling through. Tough to call an MVP when I misplayed something on basically every single Mon. So I guess by default it goes to Aerodactyl for getting 2 KOs and forcing the prep that it did yet again. From John, Machamp is an easy call for MVP, though big shoutouts to Manectric for its pivoting, as well as the Trick Room setters for facilitating the nonsense. That'll do it for this week. GG again to John for a game very well played, and that'll bring us down to 1-1 at +3, so still hovering around the upper half of the league. Next up is Week 3, a get-right game against the Baltimore Oricorios, and perhaps our best chance to use 1 or 2 of our lower picks, though no respect against the most pleasant surprise from just 1 season ago. We'll see you then.